I read Reading Like a Historian, written by Sam Weinberg, Daisy Martin, and Chauncey Montosano. So, Reading Like a Historian begins with an introduction chapter that basically explains what the purpose of the book is, which we'll talk about more a little later. And then it includes lesson plans. So, for example, it starts with a lesson plan on Pocahontas and John Smith, and then a lesson plan on the Battle of Lexington and kind of questioning who fired first, and then a lesson on Abraham Lincoln and debating whether or not his views on slavery and racism are accurately represented today. A lesson on Columbus, a lesson on Thomas Edison and technology. There's a lesson on the Dust Bowl, Rosa Parks, which I will explain later as an example lesson from the book. And lastly, there is a lesson on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so that's kind of an overview of how the book is laid out. And so in the introduction chapter, it asks this question: what is history? So for too many of our students, history has become a collection of dates and facts. Terms like historical thinking stump many as they doubt history requires any thinking at all. For too long, it has been alleged that history is boring. A recent study found that the majority of Americans describe their high school history classes as boring. That's the number one word they use to describe it. History is often made to be lifeless, as a stream of facts, and with little disputation. But it is important to recognize that history is not black and white. It's full of color, stories, investigations, debates, questions, intrigue, adventures, and more. So this book offers an alternative to the vicious cycle of teaching students facts that will soon evaporate into thin air. Facts are crucial to historical understanding, but there's only one way for them to take root in memory. Facts are mastered by engaging students in historical questions that will spark their curiosity and make them passionate about seeking answers. In an age where I found it on the internet masquerades as knowledge, history serves as a vital counterweight to intellectual sloppiness. Today's students gasp for air beneath mounds of information and have never been in greater need of ways to make sense of it all. And so this is where Reading Like a Historian comes in handy. The authors understand that very few students actually go on to pursue history degrees. Only a small percentage will ever become professional historians. And so it's crucial that students learn to read like a historian and learn these skills in their middle school and high school years, as they will benefit them in any profession and in every day of life. So historians have developed powerful ways of reading that allow them to see patterns, make sense of contradictions, and formulate reasoned interpretations when others get lost in the forest of detail and throw up their hands in frustration. So obviously we are not talking about the esoteric procedure of working in an archive. Rather, we mean the practices that historians have developed that can be used to make sense of conflicting voices that compete every time we turn on Fox News or MSNBC or any news article. So Reading Like a Historian provides the essential tools for good citizenship through teaching concrete skills. So teaching close reading skills is really emphasized throughout this whole book, as it's perhaps the most important educational task social science teachers can do. So the first one it emphasizes is sourcing. So when we source a document, it means we consider its origins and we try to make sense of it. We ask questions like who wrote this, what is the author's perspective, why was it written, when was it written, and etc. The next important skill is contextualizing. So context is at the core of historical thinking, and it requires, among other things, making connections between historical eras and circumstances and particular events and accounts. We ask questions like when and where was this document created? What was different then? What was the same? How might the circumstances in which this document was created affect its content? And lastly, this book really emphasizes corroboration, which is comparing the perspectives, the arguments, claims, and evidence across multiple sources on the same topics and asking if the documents agree. If so, why? And if not, why don't they agree? And etc. And so I think the skills that are taught in this book relate incredibly well to Bloom's taxonomy. So teaching skills such as sourcing or contextualization and corroboration not only encourage more student participation, but they also require higher levels of thinking. As we teach these skills, we move beyond the mere recall of facts to the analyzation, evaluation, and creation of deeper and new ideas. And so it's important to recognize that this isn't like a linear pattern. We still need to recall and teach students certain facts, but it's more an incorporation of all of these levels. And so, just to give an example, so one of the lessons in this book is about Rosa Parks. And so Rosa Parks is a story that has been told countless times, and most students are pretty familiar with it. It's about an ordinary black working woman who, after a long day, boards a bus to go home, plops down in the seats designated as the white section, and then refuses to move at the bus driver's demands. In this singular act of courage, Rosa Parks stared down at the institution of segregation. In an age where young people are accused of not knowing basic historical facts, the story and example of Rosa Parks provide a foundation that teachers can depend on. Much of what is known about Rosa Parks has become so distorted by myth and legend that it's tough to get to the real truth. For example, most had this image of Rosa Parks waiting in the beating hot summer sun for the bus when in reality it was the 1st of December. Other accounts differ on whether or not she was achy and tired from a long day at work. The narrative becomes much more tangled when you ask students where Miss Rosa Parks sat on the bus. Montgomery buses had 36 seats, not counting the first, reserved for the driver. The 10 seats behind the driver were considered the front of the bus, the next 16 the middle, and the last 10 the back. So where exactly did Rosa Parks sit? Did she sit on the front row? Did she sit on the back of the white section? Questions like that. So establishing such a simple fact should be a cinch, but in reality, it's much more complex than a simple answer. So one of the main questions surrounding the story was if Rosa Parks and her actions, if they were a calculated and planned civil protest or just a moment of fed-up frustration. And so basically, Reading Like a Historian provides all of these documents and questions that help students analyze the misconceptions and known stories about Rosa Parks. And it gives them 8 or 9 primary source documents that can be used to formulate their arguments and discover the real story of Rosa Parks. And so, just in conclusion, I highly recommend this book to all teachers. It provides great resources, it provides great lesson plans. Unfortunately, I wish it had more examples of how these lessons have been implemented in classrooms and a little more concrete evidence on the success of their implementation. But the ideas behind them are fantastic and really helpful to anyone trying to create lesson plans that involve higher level thinking skills such as we talked about sourcing, corroboration, contextualization. And a lot of these resources can be found on the Stanford History Education Group, which was put together by these authors. And so in conclusion, I just want to show this short clip that provides a nice little overview of this book.
Reading Like a Historian, it's honestly my main curriculum I use in my classroom.
It's the best thing out there. Every high school should be doing this.
It's met every expectation and beyond.
I think I'm a believer.
Teachers have commented, they're like, I wish this is the way I would have learned history.
I looked at the sourcing first, and then I closely looked at the document.
The first thing that this program does that's very different is that it turns history into a series of questions rather than a series of answers. A Reading Like a Historian lesson would provide students with a series of primary source documents. Students would work together and ask themselves questions like, who wrote this? What else would I need to know to make a considered and valued judgment?
The source isn't specified.
Okay, so if it was economics, you don't talk about economics.
You do engage the facts and the dates and the personalities, but in a much more meaningful and deeper way.
Nothing has happened yet, so he has no reason to go to war.
History is often taught as if it's settled, and for me to tell them this isn't settled, you have to figure it out, is empowering.
Who is this guy?
We know that most of our students will not go on to become professional historians, but we hope that they will learn a set of skills that are applicable in life.
This isn't just memorizing, that you're figuring out how to evaluate all the information that you're getting.
With the focus on ELA and math and science and STEM, history is kind of being pushed to the wayside, and by using these materials, we can help teach kids skills to make them successful. We can help make history relevant again. We can help with these Common Core objectives.
With the Common Core State Standards, there's a big push for the use of primary and secondary source documents. And the Stanford History Education Group does that legwork for you. All the online materials are free. You can't get any better than that, right? Especially when they're meaningful, well thought out materials.
You're going to read that document, then answer the questions.
The Reading Like a Historian approach really has tremendous potential to transform history classrooms.
We tested the Reading Like a Historian curriculum in 5 San Francisco high schools, and we found that students in Reading Like a Historian classrooms outperformed their counterparts.
When we started utilizing it, and I saw dramatic changes in behavior, in interest, in confidence.
It's a lifesaver for teachers that these resources are available and are so phenomenal.
So this concludes my video on Reading Like a Historian. Again, I just want to put a plug in for all teachers looking for a book that really its main strength lies in teaching you how to help students use higher level thinking skills when analyzing primary and secondary source documents. Thank you.